The rain fell hard against the old windows of the library, streaking the glass with silver trails. Inside, Cecilia Evans wrapped her cardigan tighter around her slender frame and sighed softly. Another late night. She was used to it, being the assistant librarian for the rare books division of Gray Holdings, a private collection few even knew existed. At 24, Cecilia was content with her quiet world of leather-bound books, whispered histories, and the scent of aged paper. She never thought anyone important would notice her. That was why when she saw the name Alexander Gray on the security schedule, she barely blinked. Billionaires did not walk into dusty libraries at midnight. She assumed it was just a formality, perhaps a security update or a system check. But that night, the lights flickered slightly. She stayed behind to file one last set of restoration reports. As she reached for a stack of papers near the archive cabinet, her eyes caught a folder she'd never seen before. Thick, heavy, sealed in deep green leather, it had no label. Curiosity, the kind that had always been her quiet flaw, stirred inside her. Just a peek, she told herself. She slipped on a pair of cotton gloves, lifted the folder gently, and flipped it open. Inside were pages dense with signatures, financial records, and at the top, a name that made her breath catch. Luis Medina. Her hands trembled. That was her mother's last name? Medina. But she had no father listed on any record she knew. Her mother had always refused to speak of him, and yet here, in front of her, was a name tied to a multi-million-dollar agreement. More than that, the words, "Hostile Acquisition," blazed across the top in red ink. Cecilia leaned closer, her pulse racing. She read the next line carefully, trying to make sense of the legal jargon. This was not just a business deal. This was revenge. She could feel it in the way the documents were worded, in the urgency of the attached memos. A shadow fell across the page. Slowly, she lifted her eyes. Standing in the doorway, framed by the dim golden light of the hallway, was a man she had only ever seen in magazines, on the covers of Forbes and Fortune. Alexander Gray. His tailored suit clung to him like a second skin, dark hair slightly tousled, eyes sharp as a blade, honed on war. But what struck Cecilia most was not his power or his wealth. It was his stillness, like a man who had long ago learned that control meant survival. His gaze dropped to the folder in her hands. "If you read another line," he said, voice smooth and cold, "you're mine." Cecilia froze. Her breath hitched in her throat. Her fingers tightened instinctively around the folder, then loosened. She backed up slightly, cheeks flushed with both embarrassment and confusion. I'm sorry," she stammered. "I didn't mean to." He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming the small space between them. He did not look angry, not even irritated. If anything, he looked intrigued. "You are not supposed to be here this late," he murmured. His eyes swept over her, not in a way that made her feel exposed, but as if he was cataloging every detail, every flaw, every crack in her carefully guarded quiet. "I was just finishing some reports," she whispered, wishing the ground would swallow her. He reached out, plucked the folder from her hands effortlessly, and closed it. For a moment, their fingers brushed. Cecilia felt it like a spark, a jolt of heat she did not understand. "Curiosity is a dangerous thing," Alexander said softly. Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, "especially for someone as untouched by this world as you." Cecilia's cheeks turned crimson. Untouched. The word echoed in her chest, stirring something deep and unfamiliar. She did not know, then, that this night would unravel everything she thought she knew about herself, about love, about the cost of stepping beyond the boundaries she had always obeyed. As Alexander Gray walked away, folder in hand, his last words lingered in the still air. "You should be careful, Miss Evans. The next time you open a door you cannot close, it might just open you instead." Cecilia Evans had always lived quietly, not because she was afraid of the world, but because the world had never invited her to be loud. She was the kind of girl who wore long sleeves even in the summer, who tucked her dark hair into a neat braid, who carried herself with the posture of someone used to shrinking into the background. She lived in a small apartment with her mother, Maria Medina, a woman whose health had been declining for years. Cecilia worked to pay the rent, the medical bills, and whatever scraps were left went toward books, the only indulgence she allowed herself. Her days were measured in tasks, her nights in whispered prayers for a break she didn't dare expect. Her world was small, orderly, safe. Alexander Gray, on the other hand, was anything but small or safe. 32 years old, the youngest billionaire CEO in New York, he commanded boardrooms and headlines with the same casual ease. The media called him ruthless, a business shark, a master strategist. His employees called him brilliant but impossible. His rivals called him lethal, but no one called him kind. Behind the scenes, Alexander carried a wound that never quite healed. His family's empire, once a powerful force in the industry, had been destroyed when he was still in college. His father's trusted business partner, Luis Medina, had orchestrated a hostile takeover, stripping the Gray family of everything. His father had crumbled under the betrayal and the public shame, and 2 years later, unable to bear the weight of failure, had ended his own life. Alexander had spent the following decade rebuilding, piece by piece, until he stood taller, richer, and colder than anyone had ever imagined. But behind the perfection, there was still a boy who had watched everything he loved burn. The world that separated Cecilia and Alexander was made of money, power, and secrets. Cecilia worked in the rare books division at Gray Holdings, a place where silence was the rule and touch was forbidden. She never imagined that the CEO even knew her name. But after that night, when she saw the contract, something shifted. Alexander began showing up more often, not with grand gestures or direct conversations, but quietly, like a shadow lingering at the edge of her world. He would appear in the library, pretending to skim through files, but his eyes always found her. He watched how she brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear, how she traced the spines of old books with a reverence few understood, how her brow furrowed slightly when she concentrated. She noticed, too, though she tried not to. She noticed the way his tailored suits fit like they were part of him, the faint scar near his jawline, the way his fingers tapped a slow rhythm on the desk when he was deep in thought. It was not a courtship. It was not even a flirtation. It was something quieter, stranger, a slow orbit drawing them closer without either of them daring to name it. One evening, as she stayed late organizing the collection, she found a cup of tea placed carefully on her desk. She looked up, startled, but no one was there. Only the faintest trace of his cologne lingered in the air. The next day, when she came in, she found the lamp above her workspace had been replaced. She had complained about the flickering bulb for weeks, but no one from maintenance ever responded. Somehow, Alexander had known, and so it went. Little things, a chair adjusted to her height, a window fixed, a note, unsigned, reminding her to take breaks. She told herself it was nothing. She was nothing, just a small, quiet girl who had once been foolish enough to peek into a folder and now lived under the gaze of a man who saw everything. But then came the night of the storm. The subway lines were down, the streets were flooded, and Cecilia was stranded at the office. She sat curled in a chair, shivering in her damp clothes, too proud to call for help, too tired to figure out an alternative. And then, as if summoned by her misery, Alexander appeared. Without a word, he draped his coat over her shoulders and sat down beside her. They watched the rain lash against the windows in silence. After a while, he spoke softly. "You remind me of something I lost." She turned, startled, but he did not elaborate. His gaze remained fixed on the storm. That night, as the hours passed and the storm raged, they sat side by side, two people from different worlds sharing the same small space. When she fell asleep, head tilted slightly against the chair, he stayed awake, watching the rise and fall of her breath, the delicate curve of her hand resting in her lap. Something inside him cracked open, something he had buried for so long he almost forgot it was there. From that point on, the air between them was charged. They spoke more often now, small exchanges that meant little on the surface, but everything underneath. He asked her why she chose books over people. She asked him why he worked so late when he could have anything, anyone. Neither gave full answers, but each left the other wondering. Cecilia felt herself drawn to him, not because of his wealth or power, but because of the flicker of loneliness she saw behind his eyes. And Alexander, for all his careful control, found himself waiting for moments when she would walk into the room, when her soft voice would break the silence, when her presence would remind him that not everything was strategy and vengeance. Neither of them said it aloud, neither of them dared, but the quiet pull between them was undeniable, and neither knew how long they could resist the gravity drawing them closer. Cecilia began to notice how her heart sped up when she heard his footsteps in the corridor. She noticed how his gaze softened when it rested on her, how his voice dipped slightly when they spoke alone. She told herself it was her imagination. Men like Alexander Gray did not notice girls like her, and yet the signs were there, subtle but constant. One evening, as she was locking the archive room, she turned and nearly collided with him. He steadied her by the elbow, his fingers warm and firm. For a moment, neither moved. His eyes searched hers, a flicker of something unspoken passing between them. Then, as if catching himself, he let go and stepped back. "Careful, Miss Evans," he murmured. "You're always so quiet I hardly notice when you're near." She flushed, unsure how to respond, but he was already gone, leaving only the faint trace of his cologne in the air. Days passed, and their encounters multiplied. Small conversations by the window, shared glances across the room, moments that stretched just a second too long. He began asking her questions, simple but oddly personal. What was her favorite book? Why did she always hum the same tune when she worked? Did she believe in second chances? She answered cautiously, aware of the boundaries, but every answer seemed to pull them closer, as if the two of them were weaving an invisible thread between their separate worlds. She never dared to ask about his past, though she sensed its weight in the way he watched the city at night, in the tightness of his jaw when the topic of family arose, in the rare moments his mask slipped and left him looking heartbreakingly human. One afternoon, a package arrived for her at the library desk. Inside was a first-edition copy of her favorite novel, a book she had once mentioned in passing. There was no note, no signature, but she knew. She clutched it to her chest, her heart thudding wildly, torn between joy and confusion. Why was he doing this? What did it mean? That night she stayed late, hoping for a glimpse of him. When he finally appeared, standing in the doorway of the archive room, she gathered her courage. "Why me?" she asked softly. He walked toward her, slow, deliberate. "Because you see the world in a way I forgot," he murmured. "Because when you look at me, you don't see the headlines or the money or the mistakes. You just see me." She swallowed hard, every nerve in her body awake. "And what do you see when you look at me?" she whispered. His gaze darkened, his voice low. "I see someone I shouldn't want." The distance between them thinned, the air heavy with things neither dared name. For weeks, they danced along the edge of something electric. A brush of his hand against hers when passing a book, a lingering glance across a crowded room, the way his voice softened when he spoke her name. She felt the pull of him everywhere, in her thoughts, in her dreams, in the way her heart skipped every time her phone buzzed with a message she hoped was his. He, in turn, found himself distracted for the first time in years. Meetings blurred, contracts became tedious, and every evening he found an excuse to wander to the library floor, to watch her work, to listen to her quiet hum as she catalogued ancient texts. Yet, neither crossed the line, neither was willing to be the first to break the fragile balance they had built. Cecilia reminded herself constantly of who she was: a librarian, an employee, a girl from a world he would never truly understand. Alexander reminded himself of what he was: a man built on vengeance, driven by control, unwilling to risk the chaos of real attachment. But the tension simmered, day after day, building with every shared moment, every unspoken word, until it became unbearable. One stormy night, the electricity flickered in the building. Cecilia stood by the tall window, watching the lightning arc across the sky, lost in thought. She barely noticed when he approached until his reflection appeared beside hers in the glass. "You should go home," he said softly. "The weather's getting worse." She turned to face him, heart racing. "Do you always tell people what to do, Mr. Gray?" she teased, surprising even herself. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that made her knees weak. "Only the ones I want to keep safe." The air crackled between them, more charged than the storm outside. Slowly, he reached out, his hand hovering just above her cheek, not quite touching. "Tell me to stop," he murmured, his breath warm against her skin. She should have. Every part of her screamed that this was dangerous, reckless, impossible. But instead, she whispered, "I don't want you to." His fingers brushed her jaw, feather-light, sending shivers down her spine. For a moment, time held its breath, but then, just as suddenly, he pulled away, his eyes shuddering, his expression hardening. "I can't," he said roughly, "not with you." And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving her trembling in the echo of what almost was. She stayed by the window long after he left, her heart aching with confusion, longing, and a quiet, dawning realization that she was falling for a man she could never have. In the days that followed, he avoided her. He stopped coming to the library, stopped sending small notes, stopped lingering in doorways. She told herself it was for the best, that it was foolish to hope for anything more, but the ache in her chest told a different story. Then, one evening, she received a message on her phone. Just 2 words, "Come up." Heart pounding, she rode the elevator to the top floor, her mind racing with possibilities. When the doors opened, she found him standing by the window, a glass of whiskey in hand, his silhouette tense against the night skyline. He didn't turn when she entered. "I should have stayed away," he said quietly. "I should have let you go before this started." She swallowed, her voice shaking. "Why didn't you?" Slowly he faced her, his eyes dark with emotion. "Because I can't stop thinking about you." The confession hung between them, fragile and dangerous. She stepped closer, her hands trembling. "Then why are you pushing me away?" He let out a rough breath, setting the glass down. "Because I ruin everything I touch. Because you deserve more than a man who doesn't know how to let go of his past." Her heart ached, but she refused to back down. "Let me decide what I deserve," she whispered. For the first time, something in his gaze cracked. He reached for her, pulling her into his arms with a desperation that stole her breath. His mouth found hers, slow and searching, as if memorizing the taste of her, the shape of her, the reality of something he had denied himself for too long. They stayed like that, for what felt like forever, wrapped in the quiet storm of their own making. When they finally parted, he rested his forehead against hers, his voice raw. "This changes everything, Cecilia." She nodded, tears prickling her eyes. "I know." Neither knew then how true those words would be, how the path they had just stepped onto would twist and turn, testing them in ways neither could imagine. But in that moment, with the city stretched out before them, and the weight of their feelings laid bare. They chose each other, despite the odds, despite the risks, despite the voice of reason warning them both to run. And somewhere deep inside, they both knew this was only the beginning. The following weeks unfolded like a fragile dream, delicate moments strung together in stolen hours, quiet glances, and soft touches. Cecilia had never felt anything like it before. She'd never been kissed the way Alexander kissed her, never been held the way his arms wrapped around her when the world felt too heavy, never known what it was like to be truly seen by someone. For Alexander, it was both intoxicating and terrifying. He hadn't planned for this, hadn't expected to fall for the quiet librarian with the shy smile and the kind heart. He had built his life around precision, strategy, and control, but with Cecilia, none of his usual tools worked. She unraveled him, not with demands or seduction, but with honesty, with her gentle way of asking questions no one else dared, with her refusal to treat him like a prize to be won. And yet, beneath their growing connection, a darker truth lurked, one that Alexander had kept buried for too long. He told himself it didn't matter. She didn't know. She would never find out. But secrets have a way of surfacing, especially when love begins to pull two people together in ways neither can resist. It was late one night when Cecilia found herself alone in his penthouse office, waiting for him to return from a meeting. She wandered the space quietly, running her fingers along the edges of his bookshelves, her eyes drifting across the framed photographs and awards. Then, on the corner of his desk, she noticed the folder. The same deep green leather, the same unmarked cover. Her heart skipped. She knew she shouldn't look, knew it wasn't her place, but curiosity stirred again, sharp and relentless. She told herself it was harmless, just a peek. She slipped the folder open and scanned the top page. Her breath caught Luis Medina, her father. Her knees went weak as she sank into the nearest chair, eyes racing over the words. Plans for acquisition, strategies for dismantling the Medina legacy, detailed outlines for a revenge decades in the making. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, a sick realization blooming in her chest. This wasn't just business, this was personal. Her heart pounded as pieces fell into place. His coldness when they first met, his calculated moves, his relentless focus. She was part of his plan all along, or at least she had been. The door clicked open behind her. She jumped to her feet, the folder clutched in her shaking hands. Alexander stepped in, his expression shuddering the moment he saw her. His eyes flicked to the folder, then back to her. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, he said quietly, "You weren't supposed to see that." Cecilia's voice cracked. "Is that why you kept me close? Was I just a part of this revenge?" He stepped forward, pain flickering in his eyes, but she backed away. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't lie to me." His jaw tightened. "I never lied to you." Her eyes filled with tears. "But you didn't tell me the truth either." He reached for her, but she shook her head. "I can't do this, Alexander. I can't be part of your war." Her voice broke. I thought what we had was real." His own voice softened, ragged. "It was. It is." She swallowed hard, struggling to breathe past the ache in her chest. "Then why does it feel like I was just a game to you?" He closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. "You were never a game, Cecilia." She let out a shaky laugh, tears sliding down her cheeks. "Funny, that's exactly what it feels like." Without another word, she turned and walked out, her steps echoing in the silent room. Alexander stood frozen, every instinct screaming at him to go after her, to pull her back, to explain everything. But he didn't move. He couldn't. His past had finally caught up with him, and this time it had cost him the one thing he hadn't known he needed until he lost it. Cecilia spent the following days in a haze of heartbreak. She buried herself in work, avoided calls, shut herself off from the world. Her mother noticed the change, the hollow look in her daughter's eyes, but Cecilia offered no explanation. She told herself it was for the best, that she was foolish to believe she could matter to a man like Alexander, that their worlds were never meant to touch. But at night, when she lay awake in her small apartment, she couldn't stop remembering the way he had looked at her, the way his touch had made her feel safe and wanted and alive. She hated that she missed him. She hated that even now, part of her wanted to forgive him. Alexander, meanwhile, was unraveling. Without her, his world felt empty, his victories hollow. He sat in boardrooms, surrounded by advisors and executives, but his mind was elsewhere. He couldn't escape the memory of her face when she looked at him with betrayal and hurt, the way her voice had cracked when she asked if she was just a game. He knew he had to fix this, but he didn't know how. Apologies weren't something he practiced. Vulnerability was foreign to him, but losing Cecilia had torn something open inside him, something he couldn't ignore. One night, unable to bear the silence any longer, he found himself standing outside her apartment building. He didn't go in. He just stood there, staring up at the windows, wondering if she was awake, if she was thinking about him, if she still cared. He stayed until dawn, then left without a word. Days turned into weeks, and the distance between them stretched painfully thin. Then, one morning, Cecilia received a letter. No name, no return address, just a single sheet of paper inside. On it, in Alexander's handwriting, were the words, "I built my life on revenge, but you were the only part of it that ever made me want to stop. I'm sorry. For all of it. For not telling you sooner. For being too much of a coward to fight for you when it mattered. I understand if you never want to see me again. But if there's even the smallest part of you that still believes in us, I'll be waiting." Cecilia's hands trembled as she read the note, her heart pounding. She hated how much hope stirred inside her, how much she wanted to believe in his words. But trust was a fragile thing, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to risk breaking again. Still, that night, as she sat alone in her apartment, she found herself glancing at the clock, wondering if he was out there, waiting. Wondering if maybe, just maybe, some stories were worth fighting for. Cecilia's heart pounded as she stood on the sidewalk outside Alexander's penthouse. She told herself she was foolish to be here, that she should walk away and never look back, but her feet refused to move. She could still hear his voice in her mind, soft and aching, telling her she was the only part of his life that made him want to stop the war he had been fighting for years. She hated that she wanted to believe him, hated that despite everything, she still loved him. With a shaky breath, she stepped inside. The elevator ride to the top floor felt endless, each passing second tightening the knot in her chest. When the doors slid open, she stepped into the familiar space, the quiet luxury of his world pressing in on her from every side. He was there, standing by the window, his silhouette tense against the city lights. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then he turned, his eyes locking onto hers with a mixture of surprise and hope and fear. "Cecilia," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. She swallowed hard. "I got your letter." His shoulders sagged, as if the weight of the past weeks had finally landed on him all at once. "I didn't think you'd come." She took a slow step forward. "Neither did I." The silence stretched between them, heavy and trembling. She wanted to scream at him, to demand why he hadn't told her the truth, why he had pulled her into his world only to push her away. But when she looked at his face, she saw something raw and unguarded there, something she had never seen before. She saw regret. She saw longing. She saw the man who, for all his wealth and power, was still just a man who had been hurt and had learned to hurt back. Slowly, he reached out a hand, his fingers trembling just slightly. "I don't deserve another chance," he murmured, "but I'm asking for one anyway." For a heartbeat, Cecilia remained frozen. Then, without a word, she stepped forward and took his hand. The moment their fingers touched, something inside both of them broke open. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her close with a fierce, almost desperate tenderness. She pressed her face to his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of him, feeling his heart racing under her cheek. His hands moved to cup her face, tilting her head up so he could kiss her, slow and searching, as if he was memorizing every taste, every breath. She melted into him, her hands clutching his shirt, her body trembling with the force of everything she had tried to hold back. They stumbled back into the room, his mouth never leaving hers, their hands roaming with a mixture of reverence and hunger. He touched her as if she was something precious, something he had been terrified to break, but could no longer bear to hold at a distance. She pulled him closer, her own hands threading through his hair, her body arching into his with a need she had never known before. When they finally sank onto the bed, it wasn't rushed or frantic. It was slow, careful, a quiet surrender. He undressed her with trembling fingers, pressing soft kisses to every inch of exposed skin, whispering her name like a prayer. She touched him in return, learning the shape of his body, the scars he had hidden from the world, the vulnerable places he had never let anyone see. When they finally came together, it was with a gasp and a sigh, bodies joining in a rhythm as old as time, hearts beating in a chaotic, beautiful symphony. He moved with care, his hands constantly checking, constantly asking without words if she was okay, if she wanted this, if she trusted him. And she did. For all the pain and betrayal, for all the heartbreak they had endured, she trusted him now, in this moment, more completely than she had ever trusted anyone. Their lovemaking was not just about passion, it was about healing, about forgiveness, about letting go of the past and choosing, even if just for one night, to believe in something tender and real. Afterward, they lay tangled in the sheets, her head resting on his chest, his fingers stroking lazy circles along her back. Neither of them spoke for a long time, content to simply exist in the quiet aftermath, the city lights casting soft patterns across the room. Finally, she lifted her head to look at him, her eyes soft and searching. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. His expression darkened just slightly, a shadow passing over his features. "I don't know," he admitted. "I know I want you here. I know I want us. But I also know that the world won't make it easy." She traced a finger along his jaw, feeling the tension there, the weight of 1,000 unspoken fears. "We'll figure it out," she murmured, "together." But even as they clung to each other, a storm was brewing outside their little sanctuary. Word had already begun to spread. Whispers in the press, murmurs among his board members, questions about the quiet librarian who had somehow captured the attention of the most untouchable man in the city. And soon the fallout began. Anonymous tips to gossip blogs, paparazzi lurking outside her apartment, headlines speculating about her motives, her past, her connection to the infamous Grey Empire. Cecilia tried to ignore it, tried to focus on the work she loved and the man she was slowly learning to trust again. But the pressure mounted with each passing day, and Alexander, for all his power and influence, found himself backed into a corner, his advisors warning him to cut ties, to focus on the business, to protect the empire he had spent years rebuilding. The final blow came one evening when she arrived at the penthouse and found him waiting for her, his expression closed off, his posture rigid. "We need to talk," he said quietly. Her stomach turned. She knew that tone, knew that look. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice trembling. He exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. "The board is threatening a vote. Investors are pulling back. They think I'm distracted. Weak." She stepped closer, reaching for him. "You're not weak, Alexander." He flinched, pulling just out of reach. I can't let them tear everything apart over this. Her heart cracked. So what are you saying? He looked at her, his eyes pained and resigned. I'm saying I need to protect what I've built, and right now, that means letting you go. The words hit her like a slap. She staggered back, shaking her head. No, you don't mean that, Nee. His jaw clenched. I do. Tears filled her eyes. After everything we've been through, after everything we've said, you're just ending this? He closed his eyes, his voice rough. It's not what I want, it's what I have to do. She let out a strangled sound, somewhere between a laugh and a sob. No, you're just scared. He didn't deny it. She took a trembling breath, her heart shattering piece by piece. Then goodbye, Alexander. She turned and walked away, refusing to look back, refusing to let him see her break. That night, she packed her things and left the city, seeking refuge in the quiet countryside where her grandmother lived. She needed space, needed time to remember who she was without him. And Alexander, for all his success and power, found himself alone in a way he had never been before, haunted by the echo of her absence, by the memory of her touch, by the realization that he had let the one person who made him feel alive slip through his fingers. The days stretched into weeks, and Cecilia buried herself in the quiet rhythms of the countryside, helping her grandmother with small chores, walking through fields lined with wildflowers, trying to silence the ache inside her chest. But no matter how far she ran, Alexander haunted her. His voice echoed in her memories, the way he had said her name like it was something precious, the way his eyes softened when he looked at her, the way his touch had made her feel like she was worth something more than she had ever believed. She hated how much she missed him, hated how even now she wondered if he was thinking about her, if he regretted pushing her away. Meanwhile, back in the city, Alexander's world was falling apart. On the surface, everything looked the same. Meetings, mergers, polished interviews, and headlines declaring him unstoppable. But inside, he was hollow. He went through the motions, attending board meetings, reviewing contracts, making decisions that once thrilled him, but now they left him numb. He told himself he had done the right thing, that letting Cecilia go was necessary to protect his empire, but the truth was, without her, none of it mattered. His nights were sleepless, his bed cold, his thoughts consumed by the sound of her laugh, the warmth of her smile, the fierce tenderness she had shown him when no one else dared to look beyond his walls. One night, Alexander found himself alone in his penthouse, standing by the window and staring down at the glittering city below. He thought about the life he had built, the revenge he had chased, the empire he had sacrificed everything for, and he realized with a sharp, aching clarity that none of it could fill the hole she had left behind. Without another thought, he reached for his phone and called his assistant. "Cancel everything tomorrow," he said quietly. "I'm leaving." His assistant stammered in confusion, but Alexander didn't explain. He packed a small bag, stepped into his private car, and told the driver to take him to the countryside. He didn't know what he would say to her, didn't know if she would even listen, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He couldn't let her go without trying. When Cecilia opened the door the next afternoon, she froze. There he was, standing on the porch, his usually polished appearance slightly rumpled, his eyes tired but determined. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then she whispered, "Alexander." His voice was rough, almost broken. "I'm sorry." She stepped back, shaking her head, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. "Why are you here?" He let out a shaky breath. "Because I made the biggest mistake of my life when I let you go." She crossed her arms, trying to steel herself against the pull of him. "You chose your empire over me." His eyes darkened with regret. "I was scared. I thought I could protect what I built, but I realized too late that the only thing worth protecting was you." She bit her lip, her heart hammering in her chest. "You hurt me, Alexander." His shoulders sagged. "I know, and I don't expect you to forgive me, but I'm here to ask for a second chance anyway." She hesitated, her defenses wavering, her heart aching with the weight of everything they had lost. "Why now?" she asked softly. "Why not weeks ago?" He stepped closer, his voice trembling. "Because I had to lose you to understand what you meant to me. Because I built my life on revenge, but you showed me there's more to live for. Because I love you, Cecilia, and I don't want to spend another day pretending I don't." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she let out a shaky laugh. "You're an idiot," she whispered. He smiled faintly, reaching up to brush a tear away. "I know." She closed the distance between them slowly, her hands trembling as she rested them on his chest. "If I let you back in, if we try again, you have to promise me something." He cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing her cheek. "Anything." She took a deep breath, her voice shaking. "No more running. No more pushing me away when things get hard. If you want me, you fight for me." His eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I will fight for you, every day, for the rest of my life." With a soft, broken sob, she leaned into him, her arms wrapping around his waist as his closed tightly around her. They stood like that for a long time, the past and the pain melting away in the warmth of their embrace. That night, they sat together under the stars, talking quietly about everything they had kept hidden for too long. She told him about her fears, about how she had never believed she was enough, about how loving him had terrified her. He told her about his anger, his grief, his long years of chasing revenge, and how empty it had all felt until she walked into his life. They didn't have all the answers, didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time, they faced it together, hand in hand. When they returned to the city, they didn't hide. They walked into the world as a team, ignoring the whispers, the headlines, the judgment. Alexander faced his board, faced his investors, and told them plainly, "This is the woman I love. She is not a distraction. She is my choice." Some supported him, some didn't, but he didn't care. For the first time, he chose love over control, and it changed everything. Cecilia returned to her work, holding her head high, no longer the quiet, sheltered librarian, but a woman who had fought for her place and claimed it without apology. And Alexander, the untouchable billionaire, the man who had once built his world on cold strategy, learned that true strength came not from power, but from vulnerability, from opening his heart and daring to love. Months passed, and life found its new rhythm for Cecilia and Alexander. They learned to navigate the noise together, to create small pockets of peace within a world that always demanded more, always watched, always judged. But now, when the pressure mounted, when the world outside knocked at their door, they turned to each other instead of away. Alexander no longer saw love as a risk to his empire. He saw it as his anchor. Cecilia no longer believed she was someone easily forgotten or replaceable. She knew her worth, not because Alexander validated it, but because she had rediscovered it for herself. On a quiet evening, they stood together on the balcony of the penthouse that had once been a symbol of his loneliness and now had become their shared home. Cecilia leaned into his side, her head resting against his shoulder, as they watched the city shimmer under the stars. She smiled softly, thinking of the strange, wild path that had brought them here. She thought about the shy librarian she had been, the one who had stumbled into a billionaire's life by pure accident, the one who had doubted whether she could ever matter in a world so far from her own. And she thought about the woman she had become, the woman who stood beside him now, not as a distraction, not as a curiosity, but as his equal, his partner, his love. Alexander wrapped his arm around her, pressing a gentle kiss to her temple. "You know," he murmured, "if someone had told me a year ago that I would fall for a stubborn, book-loving virgin librarian who talks in her sleep and argues about poetry at 2 a.m, I would have laughed." Cecilia laughed softly, turning to look up at him. "And if someone had told me I would love a ruthless billionaire who once thought emotions were a liability, I would have run for the hills." He smiled, his eyes soft and bright. "But here we are," she nodded, her heart full, her chest tight with a quiet joy she had never known before. Here we are. They stood like that, wrapped in each other, as the city hummed below them, as the world moved on, unaware of the quiet miracle unfolding in one high-rise apartment. Their love was not perfect. It was messy, complicated, built on mistakes and forgiveness, on risk and vulnerability. But it was real, and that, they both knew, mattered more than any fairy tale. Alexander had learned to let go of his past, to stop defining himself by old betrayals, to stop believing that power was the only thing that made him untouchable. He had learned that love was not weakness, it was strength. Cecilia had learned that her worth was not measured by titles or bank accounts, not by the size of her world or the weight of her name. She had learned that love was not about being chosen by someone powerful. It was about standing beside someone hand in hand, heart to heart, and choosing each other, again and again, no matter how hard the world tried to pull them apart. As they stood on that balcony, Alexander leaned down, his lips brushing hers in a soft, lingering kiss. "I love you," he whispered. Cecilia smiled, her heart aching in the best possible way. "I love you too." And in that moment, under the stars, they both understood something simple and true. Real love is not about perfection or promises or grand gestures. It's about the quiet decision to stay, to fight, to believe. It's about holding on to each other when everything else says, let go. And sometimes it's about realizing that the most beautiful stories don't begin with certainty. They begin with chaos, with vulnerability, with a single, breathtaking dare to open your heart and let someone in.